Dr. Sonali Majumdar. You are the Assistant Dean for Professional Development at the Graduate School of Princeton University and the founder of the Graduate Career Consortium's International Community of Practice. What is one big misconception people have about international students?
First of all, G, thank you so much for inviting me. I've been following you on LinkedIn and, also watched some of your YouTube videos. So it's really great to kind of be part of this community and share my perspective. I was an international PhD student myself and also an international postdoc, born and brought up in India and spent about a decade in the US doing scientific research after moving into university administration to kind of enhance scientific training through building career professional development for, PhDs and postdocs, primarily like building pathways that did not exist for us. And so the book that I've recently written called Thriving as an International Scientist is informed by my own perspective, a lot of my peers' perspective who were fellow PhD students and postdocs at the time as me, many of them international, as well as now my graduate students and postdocs in the science engineering, which majority are international from other countries. And so one of the things that in my work, especially working with administrators, faculty, as well as industry professionals, have found is the lack of appreciation of how much immigration policy and rules really affect every aspect of an international scholar's life. Personally, but also professionally, their mobility, which there's been a lot more recognition in the past year and a half because of, how many changes that are coming and the media that has amplified those issues. But smaller things like sometimes there isn't enough transparency where, other academics may not know that it's not easy for international scholars to just travel for conferences abroad. They have to have months or years in some time to wait to get visas approved, right? The second thing is also the idea that they cannot, quote unquote, work or have other experiences while they're doing their PhD or postdoc, how hard it is, and also to build short-term or long-term careers, right? So these kind of recognition, either we don't talk most about it or, the amount of impact it has. The second thing that I would bring up is also tied to immigration is the career mobility, right? Like it's very hard for folks to actually go into careers that are not exactly narrowly defined related to their research areas. And so as the job market is changing as frequently, moving into career paths that aren't directly the kind of research one has done or the kind of teaching one has done is really hard on a visa. And so I wish there was more understanding around that for mentors, for those who are supporting or even employing internationals. And then on a day-to-day level, the amount of paperwork and administration it takes to even maintain your status. I joke with people that I pretty much carry my entire life in a portfolio or a bunch of portfolios now, because you just don't know what kind of document is going to be asked for your next visa step or extension or retention or whatever else you're doing. And it takes a lot of time to maintain that, right? And I wish there was more empathy and grace given to internationals where they could spend some more of their work time or given some time off to actually take care of some of these immigration hurdles. Again, like I said, a lot of these conversations have become more clear in the past year and a half, and people are talking about these. But I wish that was always the case. I've seen a lot of progress in the past few years, but even when I started my PhD in 2007, there was very little sort of knowledge around the international experience. And the final thing that I would say, at least in the scientific research domain in science engineering, is international students and postdocs have access to fewer research fellowships and grants, most of them from federal sources. And so as we are thinking through diversifying sources of funding for scientific research in this moment, in the book, I make an open sort of call for folks to really think about are the different funding streams open to the majority of the workforce in science engineering at the PhD level who are internationals, most likely on visas.
So good. And to the last point, even when I started graduate school in 2009, and even back then you had maybe half of the PhD student population being international students, and yet we didn't have access to funding, like you rightly pointed out. And it's not like you can just pack up and travel to Mexico if there's a conference there. And it's, you definitely need some lead time leading up to that. And even as an F1 student, it would be difficult sometimes to get a visa to these places from the US. And so I absolutely identified. I also identified with the fact that your whole life was in a portfolio. I remember for the longest time, when I was going through, because I came here for undergrad and then went through to PhD level. And I remember having this pretty boxy folder, and it had everything from the I-20 that was stamped, at the embassy when I was first coming to this country, to all my, different I-20. Because every time an I-20, for those of you that don't know, is the document that proves that you've obtained admission to a university here in the US and are allowed to be in the US. And every time you change anything, if you change your major, you need to go to the international student office to change that I-20. If you get any type of funding, you need to go to the international. It's like everything, every little bit of thing you do, you have to go into the international student office to change your I-20. So I had so many versions of my I-20 sometimes, and I had to keep track of things. And every time you change schools, you have to change your I-20. So,
and also they ask you I've been on H-1Bs and now applied and got my green card. They ask you to basically send a copy of every I-20 you've held.
Yes.
So you have to scan them. At some point, I just scanned all of them and they're in a digital folder. So I didn't have to rescan them. But to your point, this is really important, right? Because you have to get your I-20 changed for any minor changes in your professional life. But also now there is this bigger conversation about limiting the duration of status or amount of time someone can hold a I-20 status as a student. And for PhDs, the 4 years that is being proposed is not realistic because most of PhDs take longer than that. Yeah. As it is, even the process of extending the I-20 and renewing it can be pretty hard, right? And so just even the paperwork, right? Just giving a funny anecdote on the green card process is something as your entire...
The whole other thing, yeah.
Yeah, starting from your diploma from the 10th or 12th grade, I think they'll ask for pretty much anything. I was struggling recently because I could not find my birth certificate. I had to go through a whole thing back in India to access my birth certificate again, which happened. But thankfully, I started looking at it pretty early. So you just you're basically every aspect of your life is kind of under the scanner as an immigrant.
Yeah. And you absolutely, and one of the things that, comes with that is the anxiety of, am I doing anything to jeopardize my visa? You may not even be doing anything. You may just be studying, but it's constantly on your mind, which kind of leads me to the next question, right? So a lot of the time, and I definitely went through this as an international student myself, when you're an international student, you assume that you have to take on every problem that you face by yourself, right? So if you're going through the I-20, having to change your I-20, you have to go through that yourself. And if you're looking for jobs, you have to figure that out yourself. And if you have to maybe try to apply for your green card, you have to figure that out yourself, right? I mean, later on, I would learn about organizations that would help. But for some international students, they don't even know that they can tap into mentors and champions. And in your book, you talk about building a community of mentors and champions. How does somebody even go ahead, gets that they're here in the country? This is their first year. They don't know anybody. How do they go about building this community of mentors and champions? Where should they start?
Yeah, so in my line of work, what we try to do is structure what some students kind of find their way along the way, but it takes them more time and anxiety and a lot more effort. And one of the frameworks that I use is the mentoring map, which was proposed by the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development, or NCFDD. And the idea there is that you think about yourself as the center of your career. And I love the framing that scholar Leonard Casuto puts on: think of yourself as the CEO of your career. And think, based on the goals that you have in the next 3 to 5 years, who are the board of advisors you would like to build around you that could help you advance in any of those goals, right? And so the map is sort of you at the center, and then you have 3 to 5 goals in different distinct areas that you identified. You have to do some self-reflection and talking to folks in your department or program to understand what are the expectations for success, both academically, professionally, and also immigration and international life is another aspect or a goal where you want to advance. And so I keep that as a separate goal, and international, like immigration goals, as well as if someone's exploring global careers, what those look like. And then based on the goals, the more you have clarity around it, then you can structure around who is able to help you in one or more of those goals, who has the most sort of direct experience and expertise. Some of those people might be the same, some of those people might be very different, right? The best first way is to, what we've done in the past is look for near peers, people who have been through that experience recently. And many universities are now starting to build those. Departments are starting to build those, where new incoming students are paired with a senior graduate student or a postdoc to give them advice on it. So finding international students who can tell you about some of these quote-unquote unwritten rules or hidden curriculum involved in living life in the United States, starting from day one on, what a social security network is, or what our credit history, or how this kind of thing works. The other thing is post-social media. A lot of this information is a little bit more democratized. Like, people like you are doing great work in clarifying some of these things. The issue becomes it's an information overload, where you have to understand what is more legitimate information versus, noise. So you have to do a little bit of the differentiation between signal to noise. And that's where credible sources really help. So checking in with the international office in your university, seeing what kinds of resources they recommend, what kind of immigration attorneys or lawyers they might tell you to get in touch with. Most universities have some sort of retainers in place if you have specific kind of complicated situation with your visa types and such, right? And finally, now there are actually 2 or 3 new resources that have come together that are really credible and legitimate, and have really, their whole goal is to give more access to information around immigration, international experience. And that one of them is called the International Student Resource Center. It's an open access public database, and they have a lot of articles starting from what to think about when you're traveling to the United States for the first time, and how to think about travel on different kind of visas like F1 or J1, to the different kinds of immigration visas, non-immigrant visas in the United States, and a lot more immigration-related education. Their goal is not just to support the international student, but also to support mentors of international students by giving them more clarity so that they're able to mentor better. And so going back to your larger point about how do you start building those networks or community of mentors and champions. So first is structure, having clarity of your own goals, and then starting to meet the people in your department. Don't discount those peers and near peers. Some of the career offices, professional development offices, graduate school, postdoc affairs, those folks actually know more people than you think.
Yeah.
And they will connect you to whether it's alumni, industry professionals, other international colleagues who can share different aspects of what your goals are, right? And from there, every person you meet, start to asking them who else you should be talking to if they learn a little bit about your goal. And this kind of thing takes time, so that starting early is nice, where kind of starting to build your community with no expectation really. Don't be transactional from the beginning where you're asking something in return. I think asking for information and guidance is sort of the best way to approach it, because most people are able to provide that. They may or may not be able to provide something else. And then by the end of a conversation, asking them who else they would recommend that you reach out to. And along the way, as you're meeting with people, if you think that someone has a very direct, relevant experience or expertise where you want to build a more deeper relationship with that person, you can ask them to be their your mentor outside of your faculty advisor, other career mentors, right? And in the book, I discuss the differences between advisor and mentor. The advisor is someone who will really help and support your development in X or Y area, whether it's research in a field or something. But mentors a little broader than that. They have a more ongoing two-way relationship with you in helping your development more broadly professionally, but also psychosocially, and helping you understand life in the US, for example. And finding those people as mentors. And then over time, some of these mentors can become champions, right? Or sponsors where they help you access opportunity, whether it's through writing letters of recommendation or referring you to jobs or other forms. Like, for example, the book that I wrote actually came from someone in my network that I've had a pretty long collaborative relationship with. And these sort of things take time. People have to know you, trust you before they can, refer you to stuff. And so that's why I'm saying, like, starting early and starting to build these networks more spontaneously. And something I've heard you say recently, something I do a lot myself, is not going with that expectation, but also as you're talking to people, recognizing those patterns on who else should be connecting with these people, becoming a connector, connecting people along the way. And that goodwill spreads really well because people remember you as someone who's not just in it for yourself. You are looking for the larger community in place. And so the idea of building this community and networking can be much more joyful than people recognize. It just takes changing that mindset from really the need-based to the learning and connecting mindset.
That's really good, Sonali. Thank you so much for that. There's so many powerful things you said in that, but I mean that what it comes down to is we all need somebody, right? And people sometimes will hide behind the cloak of introversion and say, I'm introverted and therefore that's why I keep to myself. But like Sonali is saying, right, this is not about extroversion or anything like that. It's about making sure, I like your analogy of the board of advisors, right, of having people in your life that you can refer to as resources for where you want to go, right? For some people, it is staying in the US, and for some people, it may be pursuing other global opportunities. Whatever it is, I think it's still valuable to talk. You may be shocked that you may want a job in another country, and yet somebody you speak to here is connected to somebody you don't even know works in that exact country, right? And so just speaking to people, and I love that. Sometimes I love it when people would quote me on things, because sometimes I even forget what I say. But being a connector yourself, I find is so important. Putting that goodwill out there to help others is so important. I want to move on to talking about, international students are very resilient people. I've lived through it, so I know. And we are very creative. What are some stories that stand out in your mind of resilience and creativity that international students have used to thrive, right? Because I think sometimes when you're going through these experiences, you may be tempted to think you're the only one going through them. Yeah.
I mean, first thing I want to say that I kind of bring this up in the book as well. I always have sort of a split thought and feelings about the idea of resilience and so marketing that, right? Mm-hmm. It's not by choice that we are resilient. We have no other choice. We have to be to succeed. And so when I talk to my students, I'm like, you're anyway developing this habit and attribute, so might as well relate to the prospective employer so they can see it as a skill set. Yeah. And so that's a bigger thing that, I talk about in the chapter, but I also talk a lot about it to my international graduate students here at Princeton, is identifying some of the things that we are doing in our life, but that we may not identify as a skill set, right? Like whether it's resilience or really this idea of creativity, but giving them the language to think about it as a very valued professional skill and drawing from your life experiences, not just your professional and scholarly experiences to convey these skills. And it's a function of being on visas and things changing constantly. So we are always in this nothing is for certain, environment. And sometimes it gets really bad, like it's been in the recent climate, but even in more stable times, you just don't have any predictability. And so the people that I talk to in the book they're all early to early mid-careers who got their PhDs in the last 10 years or so, and have tried to figure this out, right? And have tried to bring up this idea of how else can I do something, and using the idea of troubleshooting their life, that like they would troubleshoot their experiments. So I always give this analogy that you don't stop following your research question because one or two experiments didn't work. You change a variable to see how you can make that work and what you can still learn to advance in your research. Use the same mindset in your career path, right? Like using what variable can I change here? And what would it take to do this is the creative thinking piece in the career. And some of the folks I've talked to you had so many different sort of pivots, and you tried to do, still kind of find that middle ground of what you wanted to do and what was practically important at the time, and, kind of advancing in incremental ways towards your desired path. I want to bring up one of my former colleagues at Sloan Kettering, June Tang, who has pretty much explored every angle of business of science career. And now is an entrepreneur and connecting biotech ecosystem in the US to biotech ecosystem in China. And he was amazingly creative with his career. But he realized the biggest bottleneck was immigration. And he took that time in the beginning during his postdoc to secure his green card, whether it was picking the kinds of projects that would make him more marketable on an immigration portfolio-wise, or sticking out a little longer in a postdoc to get that green card and using that time to really build the network and the professional skills that would be required to go into a business kind of career, whether it was in philanthropy or equity research, so to speak, right? And then, the couple other sort of Indian-born scientists like Sanjana Mukherjee I spoke to, and then Umajna Goswami, who also gave me another framing of this troubleshooting, which is for those who have a very long wait to actually secure that green card, even after their initial application has been approved, they can't necessarily have that path in the short term, right? Like that they can get creative with their career. And go into roles that are not as adjacent to their career, to their research. So they fundamentally asked this question about where else can I do the work that I'm interested in. They were interested in doing more science policy, global health policy, environmental policy kind of work. But they didn't realize federal government wasn't an option because most of these fellowships and opportunities are restricted to U.S. citizens or permanent residents. And then they realized that the university system itself is way more complex than people give credit to. And there are university affiliated or adjacent research institute where science policy work happens, right? And they basically started working within university centers that do science policy work. A lot of local, state government, even federal government contracts the work that they want to do to some of these university centers, right? And so in Sanjana's case, she wanted to work in World Health Organization, but that wasn't an option. She ended up joining Georgetown's policy center called O'Neill Center, I believe. And one of their clients was WHO. And so she still got to work with WHO in Georgetown as she is building her immigration portfolio. And build the networks with them, which would eventually in the future be, pay dividends in her career. And so thinking both in the short term and long term on how many different paths you can create for yourself, and be open to serendipity, not knowing, I talk about in the book that sometimes you just don't know where those paths will lead in the long term. But just because you're curious about something, follow that curiosity, follow that, creative energy, and just let's hope that it takes you to interesting places, because it will. The most people I've talked to, they had no idea where their career would go. but, they just generally followed their instincts and something that seemed very interesting. And that has opened up doors that they would not have known about.
Yeah. I love that you said that people have a lot of people have also not known where their path will take them. I didn't know that. I didn't know. Yeah, I had no vision of starting the Bold PhD podcast. I had no vision of writing a book. I didn't as an international, trust me, and I'm sure Sonali has a similar story. As an international students, we were just really trying to survive. All I was trying to do was put one foot ahead of each other and make sure that I don't get out of visa status. I make sure I do everything that my advisor is telling me, make sure I publish my papers. And so that I build that strong immigration portfolio, which is an interesting phrase I've heard you use today, right? For those listening, right, international students listening, what is an immigration portfolio and why should they start thinking of it whilst they're in school?
Yeah, and I think it's similar to an academic research portfolio or a teaching portfolio, right? And it kind of is the same strategy on if you wanted to become a faculty, you look at what kind of CVs and what kind of accomplishments will make you successful in that track. And you start building that portfolio, whether it's through your research papers, your citations, peer reviews, etc., right? Similarly, if you have a long-term goal of being in the United States, for example, most people will look at different kinds of employment-based green cards. Mm-hmm. And so USCIS actually makes the criteria for evaluation for any of these green cards public access on their website. So anyone can go and look it up. You don't have to have a lawyer for that. It's working with lawyers, working with other international mentors who have been through the process. They tell you, you'll basically see that some of the ways that USCIS evaluates, whether it's your preeminence in the field, original contribution to the field, preeminence in the field that you're applying for, etc. Some of the work that you're doing in your academic research, whether it's writing papers or doing peer reviews and presentations, will count as immigration, but you have to intentionally think about how to frame that. Mm-hmm. And then there are other things like showing that your work is really valuable in the field is not just through the number of citations that people try to game, right? It's also doing more public outreach of your work. Are you talking about it on social media? Are you writing op-eds and articles? One of the things I talk about in the book is a simple theory of many universities have communicators that are talking about research. They're writing press releases about the research. Many grad students and postdocs don't take up those opportunities. They don't connect with these communicators. They could easily say, my paper's coming out in 3 months. This is the lab I work with. Would you be open to featuring our paper in a press release? And all it takes is one quote from you as a first or second author saying this is what informed our work. And you can use a lot of these press releases as sort of this criteria for, the impact you've had in the field, given that it's been talked about in local press. Because there is a criteria about the work, your work, being talked about by others or written by others. Yeah. And so how are people talking about you? Some of it is letters of recommendation. This goes back to that building community. And so you have to start kind of thinking about who would be some really, well-known people who write your letters. One of them, at least most of them can't be your direct collaborators. And at least one of them has to be outside the United States, right? And so taking just the example of a green card, for example, you can kind of reverse engineer where you're at and where you have to be. And then you can give yourself time, and everything that you're doing, you build a portfolio in the language of immigration. And that would help you kind of go forward. And so it's always helpful to have an immigration lawyer, set the context for you. And so most of the universities have at least someone that they could recommend that you can speak with. At least the lawyers will give you one free call. And so take the best use of that free call. And then really having mentors, international scholars who've been through the process, they could also show you examples of how they went through. Once I got my green card, I actually helped out another postdoc friend, from a friend from my postdoc. She self-petitioned and she did not have a lawyer. And we discussed a lot about how she could be like, talking about her experience. And she used her scientific skills on really doing like more data analysis. She had charts and graphs on how top 5% she was based on her field and stuff. So she did a lot of like that convincing on her own, but we discussed that and she had built something like a portfolio. And so that's important. And again, like a lot of these takes time, and this is on top of one's research and teaching, but seeing the connections between the work that you're doing and its relationship with immigration advancement, and doing some of the things strategically, like, creating more visibility of your work by doing outreach and writing in other sources, doing podcast interviews where they even show how many people listen to it and how many downloads there were. Those are quantitative measures of the impact of your work. And so thinking more broadly about how you talk about your research, that will show more visibility and impact. Could be some of the things that you think more creatively about how that could also become a portfolio, not just for your career, but also immigration. And so like in the book, I talk about like you can in parallel kind of chart both your portfolio for your career that you're interested in, but also immigration. And you will also see intersections and overlaps between some of those goals. And that will help you strategically plan on how to really spend 1 year, 2 year, 3 year towards each of those goals, and spending on things that are mutually beneficial for both types of things in your career in the beginning.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, that planning is absolutely important, right? Whether and we focused a little bit for the last few minutes on people that want to stay in the US, but whether you want to stay or you want to leave, it is important to start planning. Don't just, take a deep breath, and you do have some time, but it is important to think of these goals. And so I hope for those of you listening, and if you're a mentor or advisor to international students, that this episode can really be a great resource. Sonali, I want to chat a little bit about your career, right? You've built an impressive career. You are an assistant dean at an Ivy League school. How did you make that happen?
Okay, I still haven't found the best way to talk about this. I've had a very nonlinear career path. Right. And for me, I have very diverse interests, and I can't stick around too long with any one kind of interest. And so this is in some ways my third kind of career path, if I was going to say that. My first job was in healthcare. I right after my master's, I was part of a team that built an IVF clinic for 3 years in India, and traveled outside to learn about how to do that. And so I've always kind of found myself in entrepreneurial environments because of the kinds of like the interests I have in building new things and creating something that doesn't exist, or there are no rule books where I can like really spend my creative energies, right? And like doing that for after 3 years, I got really bored, and that has been another thread in my life. It's a good indication of thinking about something different when I feel like I'm bored in my day-to-day life. Yeah. And so that's when I kind of really thought about research, and someone along the way told me that you get paid to do research in the US, and I started looking into it. And even when I started my PhD, I came for my PhD right after. Even when I came for my PhD in postdoc, I didn't really necessarily know in the beginning what careers people go into, or the fact that academic faculty careers are sort of like traditionally thought of about as success. So I was very open-ended when I started my PhD. Right? And I was looking at my statement of interest, like letter for admissions and stuff. And I had even in those kind of written that I'd probably go back to biotech or healthcare after my PhD. I just was in it for the curiosity of the experience, so to speak. But I found out through the PhD experience that I did not want to be faculty. I did not want to write grants. I didn't want that cyclical stress of grant, really fending for other people. And so it was, I think, again, I started my postdoc with the intention that I wanted more applied research experience and connections in biotech. And that's why I picked a postdoc in New York City, which would help me build more network in this area. And that was what I was planning to get into biotech after my PhD or my short postdoc. But it was my life in New York City, the experiences I had, the volunteering work I did, the role models and mentors I met, people who had biomedical PhDs who were starting this new field called career professional development. Around the time that was 2015, 2016, when NIH had started these broadening experiences and scientific training grants, and there were all these innovative new pilot programs starting across universities and research institutes. And it was just like, I didn't even know about the fact that this field existed or it was starting to emerge, right? So it was a combination of a lot of, again, things I was doing on the side, things I was curious about. And there was another moment then where I really, reflected on the fact that I was being more creative outside the bench than on it. And so somehow I was not that excited about a biotech career anymore because I didn't want to do this any longer. And because of my diverse interests and stuff I was doing on the side, I had inherently built a portfolio without knowing that I had built a portfolio. And that's when I started and people were appreciating my ideas, and I thought, okay, maybe I should get paid for doing this. But I was on a visa, and that's a whole other story on how I even made that pivot. But again, I think I'm a little bit, I like to take risks and informed risks. There are 3 different paths where I can still move into. So then I moved to University of Virginia as my first role after my postdoc to build a new program there called PhD Plus. They had just got a big institutional multi-year grant to build this kind of program. And it was an amazing experience where I felt like I was a kid in a candy store with money and ideas and nobody telling you what not to do, and people saying, okay, how can we build this, right? And so that was an insane experience. I started also building networks nationally. Our proposal for one of these big national initiative through American Association of University called the PhD Education Initiative got accepted. And I got to work with some of the experts in the field in the 3rd or 4th year of my time in this career path, right? I had a great time doing that. And as one of the things that I was really kind of wishing for my next step was doing more work, more close to the science engineering at UVA, is kind of overseeing the entire thing for all disciplines. And at the same time, Princeton's position opened up and they had heard of me. Some of the colleagues who I work with right now had collaborated at the national level with me, so they knew me. And so when they saw that I was even interested in exploring, they were excited. And the conversation was very different in terms of how do we bring you in? And they were mostly asking what's on the work I had done before and how can I bring this to Princeton? So all that to say that I wasn't necessarily as appreciative or really goal-oriented or coming into an Ivy. The Ivy just kind of happened along the way. But I was kind of building my own thing and the opportunity for building something new in a place like this also came forward. And it was the timing of it was really great. Yeah.
It's something I talk about in my own book, which is creating an opportunity engine. And it sounds like you did exactly that. You were, building these networks, you were creating these opportunities for yourself, and it opened up this amazing door to be at an Ivy. Such a fascinating story. Sonali, this was such a great conversation. Thriving as an international scientist, I have my copy here. I'm also interviewing here. I'm also interviewed in the book. Sonali graciously interviewed me, and it was also through her, talking about creating opportunity engines. It was also through her that I got my book contract with UC Press. So first of all,
I'm so excited to read it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's an example. We're just showing you examples of how building these networks and building these opportunities can pay off in the end.
Then also manifesting, right? I just want to say a quick sentence that I would not have known. I know your work, but I would not have known that you're interested in writing a book had you not written that LinkedIn post where you were, I think, broadly asking people if you should write another, or this is a problem that you were thinking about. And at the same time, my editor was asking, do you know other people in this field we could be reaching out to? And so sometimes saying things that you hope for yourself out in the world through places like LinkedIn are really helpful because you just never know who's going to be reading it, who's looking for something exactly like that, and you can connect people. And so speaking of serendipity, start to kind of do that for yourself by just manifesting it.
Yeah, just ask for what you need. You never know who's listening. Thank you so much, Sonali. And I'll leave all the links to the resources you mentioned, as well as your book and LinkedIn profile in the description. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, G. This was such a great conversation.
It was.